Welcome to the Duathlon Show. On this episode, Duathlon Defined. What's in a name? That which we call a rose, by any other name would smell as sweet. I'm quoting a well-known line spoken by Juliet from William Shakespeare's 1597 smash hit rom-com Romeo and Juliet. The context for this quote is a few lines higher in the play, but basically Juliet is lamenting that Romeo's last name, Montague, prevents the two of them from marrying, because her family, the Capulets, are beefing with the Montagues. She's saying, what does a name matter anyway? After all, a rose would smell the same, regardless if its name was Rose or if its name was Jabberwock. I actually disagree with Juliet here. Names do matter, both in her play and in the equally dramatic world of multisport. It's been mentioned in a previous episode that the sport of duathlon has experienced some naming uncertainty in the past. In this episode, I want to explore that naming uncertainty, but also look at a number of definitions that we can find online for the word duathlon. The best place to start is by looking at the Wikipedia entry for duathlon. Duathlon is an athletic event that consists of a running leg, followed by a cycling leg, and then another running leg in a format similar to triathlons. The history of duathlon is that it's descended from triathlon. Triathlon saw its origin in the 1970s in the United States. In 1972 or perhaps 1973, an event started running called the Dave Payne Birthday Biathlon. This so-called biathlon was a run-swim, in that order, 7.2 kilometer or 4.5 mile run, followed by what was billed as a quarter-mile swim, 0.4 kilometer, but the actual distance of the swim apparently turned out to actually be between 200 and 300 yards only. They called their event a biathlon in the early 70s here, even though the term biathlon had already been taken by the Olympic sport, which involves Norwegians, cross-country skiing, and gun shooting. That sport was in the Olympics starting in 1960. Sunny Southern California is probably one of the farthest places, both geographically and mentally, from Scandinavia, so you can see how these San Diego folks may not have heard of the Olympic biathlon, or if they had, they didn't care that their event was using the same name. It turns out that this Dave Payne Birthday Biathlon, the run swim, was actually the genesis of triathlon. Some participants in the biathlon thought the two-sport thing was a great idea. And what about adding a third sport? Wacky combination. They added a bike. That was the origin of triathlon on the west coast of the United States there. And later, from the triathlon setup, they removed another sport, the swim, and our duathlon format, run, bike, run, or as we'll see later, maybe just run, bike, or bike, run in any order, depending on who you ask or who is defining. Our beloved duathlon was born. But it all started with a biathlon that was not the Scandinavian variety. A run-swim, which I suppose is similar to the modern-day aquathlon, which is the most popular format with those two sports in multisport. Aquathlon is a swim run. Duathlon versus biathlon. Well, you probably know already that both the do prefix and the bi prefix Both mean two. Duathlon. Two competitions. The du prefix is seen in other words such as duplicate, dual, duet, and of course duo. Other words that end with bi include bicentennial, bicycle, yeah. Binocular, because you were using two eyes to see through a binocular. And bilingual. If you use Duolingo, you might become bilingual. But hey, just to confuse things, there's another two-letter common-ish word prefix that also means two. Di, di, as in carbon dioxide, a gas whose molecule has two oxygen atoms. And dilemma, which is a situation where you're unable to choose between two lemmas. So we know that the genesis of triathlon was this event that today we would label a reverse aquathlon or something like that, but back in the day they were calling it a biathlon. In those early years, a lot of events were called biathlon that today we would probably describe as a duathlon or an aquathlon or an aquabike. All of these events, the swim run, the swim bike, the run bike run, the bike run, these things were all being called biathlon, and probably in the early days, duathlon had not settled into its what I consider its accepted form today, which is run, then bike, then run. We've heard one definition so far, the Wikipedia definition. I'll say it again. Duathlon is an athletic event that consists of a running leg followed by a cycling leg and then another running leg in a format similar to triathlons. Let's look at some other definitions. We'll turn to the Wiki Empire again and visit Wiktionary this time. Wiktionary actually has a different definition than standard Wikipedia for duathlon in English. Wiktionary says, duathlon is an athletic contest consisting of running and cycling. So there's no indication of a running leg followed by a cycling leg and then another running leg, which is the duathlon that I'm familiar with, and it's the only format that I've competed in. Although I know that some races do only two legs these days, the three-leg RBR format seems to be the accepted format. That is what the Multisport World Championships uses for their duathlon and cross duathlon World Championships every year. Moving on, there are only two real dictionaries in the English language that I could find that list duathlon and define it. I can't find it on Oxford English Dictionary. Their Oxford Learner's Dictionary is free to access online. It is not in there. Triathlon, decathlon, other athlon events are in the Oxford Learner's Dictionary. Duathlon is not. I don't know about the official OED because it is not free to access. You have to have a library card or be a member of an institution or something like that. And I didn't feel like digging my library card out of the depths of a dusty drawer. But our good friends at Merriam-Webster and then Collins, two legit dictionaries, both have definitions. From Merriam-Webster, duathlon, a three-part long-distance race typically having a running phase, a bicycling phase, and a final running phase. At first I found the inclusion of long distance in this definition interesting. I race sprint duathlons, and I don't consider those or think of those as long-distance races. A long-distance race to me is like running a marathon or doing a Powerman duathlon or doing an Ironman triathlon or something like that. But I looked it up and it turns out that long-distance running is distances of 3 kilometers or longer, 1.9 miles or longer. So my little sprint duathlon that has 2 individual legs of 2.2 miles running certainly does qualify as long distance, at least in the running world. Middle distance running really refers to track events up to 3,000 meters, up to 3K. Everything run on a road to a trackie would be considered long distance. So if I run a local 5K, I don't think of that as necessarily long distance compared to these half marathons and marathons that people often run. But technically, we are all long distance runners out there on the duathlon course. Merriam-Webster goes on to provide us with a few other interesting nuggets about the word duathlon. It claims that the first known use was 1988. Interesting considering that I said that the Dave Payne birthday biathlon and then follow-up early triathlons were happening in the early 1970s. 1988 seems late to me for a first known use, considering the biathlon was being used for a bunch of different events starting in like 1972. So I wouldn't be shocked if local organizers, places were also running 2 sport events of various types called duathlons back then, but Merriam-Webster is not citing its sources when it says 1988, so I do not know what use that was or where it occurred. But I can tell you other words from that year, 1988. Crop circle, docu-series, mad cow disease, road rage, and unibrow all first appeared, to old Mr. Webster at least, in the year 88. The next and last and 2 of 2 when it comes to real dictionary definitions of the word duathlon on the English language web that I could find with my modest research is Collins Dictionary from HarperCollins Publishers. They say duathlon is an athletic contest in which each athlete competes in running and cycling events. So no mention there of a run, bike, run format from Collins. And every other dictionary definition I could find online is copied from either Webster, Collins, or Wikipedia itself. What does this tell us? First, it shows that duathlon is not a fully accepted everyday word. This has been my experience in real life. When I say I do duathlons, people always say, "Do you mean triathlon?" And then I explain what the sport of duathlon actually is. The fact that some of these sources don't specify the run, bike, run format necessarily also testifies to the fact that duathlon's a relatively new event concept. If I was a dictionary maker, however, I would be updating my dictionary to specify that duathlons typically go in the run, bike, run format. That's the language I would use. Typically run in a run, bike, run format. That leaves flexibility for non-standard duathlons, which I know still do happen. But it also acknowledges that by this point, in today's day and age, the accepted duathlon format seems to be RBR. Okay, in addition to Wikipedia plus those 2 real dictionary definitions, let's move on to a couple other results on the first page of Google if you type in duathlon. I clicked on teamusa.org. They have a page for duathlon. Here's what they say about the sport. Quote, "Duathlon is a run-bike-run combination. It is sometimes confused with biathlon, which is the official term for the Olympic sport of skiing and shooting." No argument from me with that statement. That reflects some of the other definitions we've seen and addresses the common confusion. But teamusa.org also goes on to say a few things which I will make a comment about. Quote, "Duathlons offer a great way to get involved in multisport if swimming is not your strong point." I actually don't have a negative comment about the framing here from teamusa.org, but keep this in mind, this framing of duathlons as sort of a gateway drug to triathlons. Try247.com has an article entitled, "What is a Duathlon? Your Beginner's Guide to Distances, Training, and Kit." They say, "Duathlon is an athletic event which comprises of 2 disciplines, namely running and cycling. Editor's note, comprises of? I don't think that works. Grammar. Back to the definition. A duathlon is typically held in a continuous run-bike-run format, with the transitions between the disciplines also contributing towards overall race times and positions. It is nice that they mention that transitions count towards your total time in this definition. However, before we go any farther, we have to step into the grammar grotto briefly to explain my earlier comment there. Editor's note. Comprise means contains, is made up of, embraces. Is comprised of should properly be rephrased as either comprises or is composed of. That helpful piece of English language advice actually comes from the website of the American Astronomical Society. That tells you, apparently, that the astronomers have a big is comprised of problem on their hands and are trying to address it. Now, here's where try247.com veers into the assumption that duathlon is simply the gateway drug to triathlon. Quote, research shows that running is the sport from where the largest number of new entrants into triathlon and multi-sport events originate. With many of those not necessarily having a swimming background, duathlon can provide an excellent entry point. Triathlon.org, which is the website of World Triathlon, defines duathlon like this. Consisting of running and cycling, a duathlon can be contested on almost any terrain, although it usually takes place on tarmac. So in that definition, they don't discuss the RBR format, and for some reason they mention terrain, which no one was asking about. Here's what else they say. Quote, although many athletes specialize in duathlon, there's also a lot of crossover with triathletes looking to improve their run speed and bike power. Events tend to be held in the spring or autumn so as not to clash with summer triathlon races. Seems to me that World Triathlon definitely considers duathlon to be a secondary event, something that a triathlete might do in the spring or autumn. Definitely not in the summer when there are other triathlon races, you know, the real important ones. Runner's World magazine in the UK have an article from 2009 entitled Do a Duathlon. They say, duathlon, run bike run, has existed as an organized sport since the early 1980s when it was known as biathlon. It is the perfect endurance sport for those who are less inclined to swim as a form of cross-training, to improve bike handling skills under race conditions in autumn and spring, to build strength off the bike, and for transition training. The common thread on a lot of these articles that we've just looked at is the assumption that the person who might do a duathlon is actually a different type of athlete who would be doing duathlon as a secondary activity, as a form of cross-training, to improve bike handling skills, but only in autumn and spring, apparently, to build run strength off the bike, for transition training. These are all assumptions that maybe a triathlete would do these duathlons for the purposes of building their bike handling skills, or for the purposes of nailing those transitions better so they can actually use that skill in a triathlon, which is assumed to be the real goal. This framing might be an accurate description of the current lay of the land, but I don't think it's a productive way to talk about the sport. I think if the goal is to increase participation, then World Triathlon and other governing bodies or race promoters shouldn't think of duathlon as a stop along the way to try, or as a fun little off-season event. Why not promote duathlon for duathlon's sake? Duathlon is actually way more accessible than triathlon. The fact that triathlon is at least 15 times more popular than duathlon, at least by Google hits, actually belies this fact. A tri requires the ability to swim, which is not a guarantee. In my country, 80% of Americans said they could swim, but only 56% of them could perform all 5 basic skills needed to swim safely. A tri probably also necessitates a pool membership and or access to a warm enough patch of ocean or lake to swim in. That's a huge barrier to entry for the average person. Duathlon, on the other hand, requires only two things: a pair of shoes you can run in, and access to a bicycle. You don't even have to own the bike. Grab a city bike or the local bike share option in your town for 2 hours. You'll have time to warm up, grab your registration packet, race, and return the bike before you've even spent $20, pounds, or euros. My local race organization partners with a bike rental company. You could rent a bike for one morning and race a duathlon. Much more accessible and more affordable than a pool. And don't treat the new duathlete as an addict that you have to push on to the harder stuff, triathlon. How many local runners out there own a bike but have never thought to sign up for a duathlon before? They may do local 5Ks or 10Ks or longer, but they definitely don't swim laps, they skip the pool at the gym, and they go straight to the sauna. Duathlon organizers, who are often also triathlon organizers running both races at once, wouldn't it behoove you to compete for the race registration dollars of these local running enthusiasts by promoting duathlon? Hey you, 38-year-old lifelong runner with a few marathons and halves under your belt. I know you're feeling the pain. The knee pain or the back pain. Every half or full you do these days ends up with swelling and those repetitive overuse injuries. What about a sprint duathlon instead? You own a bike. That hybrid collecting dust in the garage, or that old mountain bike you ride at the state park sometimes with your kid. You know you can sign up for a sprint duathlon. 5-ish total miles of running over 2 legs, maybe, plus maybe 10 miles of biking, a 1 hour or 1.5 hour effort, maybe, way easier than a half marathon and way more forgiving on the knees. Oh, and it's probably a race that's going to be between 30 and 130 participants. Pretty small field, so you might walk away with a great placement in your age group, even at your first race, even with a non-road bike. I've seen it happen. And if you're a woman who owns a bike, get down there. Forget triathlon. Forget the pool. Bring whatever training and legs you already have and sign up for a local do, and I bet you'll love it, and you might walk away with a goofy little plaque for an AG win. That's it for this episode. Thank you for listening to The Duathlon Show. We heard some definitions of duathlon, learned a bit of history, and then I got on my soapbox. I just don't think it makes sense to talk about duathlon as either an auxiliary training activity for triathletes or as a gateway drug for someone who will ultimately do triathlons. Do is more accessible than try. Why not try to grow the base in general and promote duathlon for duathlon's sake? Stay dry, everyone. You can follow The Duathlon Show on Twitter and YouTube at The Duathlon Show. Questions or comments? TheDuathlonShow@gmail.com. If you enjoyed the program, please leave a good rating and review on the platform where you found it, and tell your friends. You can support The Duathlon Show by donating at ko-fi.com/TheDuathlonShow.